Hey there guys, John Campea here, and thank you for visiting my movie vlog. You know, one of the hardest things out there to do is to make a good movie. A lot of people think making a good movie is an easy thing. It's not. It's an extremely difficult thing to do to make one good movie. What's very rare, even more rare than that, is to try to make a sequel that is also good. I mean, that's a pretty rare thing in Hollywood. What is almost impossible to do is to make a trilogy of films where all of them are quality and you end up with one overarching story, one big character, one series of adventures that lasts forever in the minds of the audience. So when you get great trilogies, you need to celebrate them. And so I thought I would take a few minutes here to count down what I believe are the 5 greatest trilogies in cinematic history. Now, obviously, it needs to be stated up top that all film is subjective. So I'm pretty much guaranteed that none of you are going to have the exact same list of mine, but I feel very confident in the ones I have. Now, before we get into the top 5, though, I think there are enough really good trilogies out there, too many for just 5, so I thought I should do a couple of honorable mentions. Honorable mention number 1 is actually a film that's in theaters right now. It's the Planet of the Apes trilogy. You know, when they first said they were doing another Planet of the Apes after the Marky Mark and His Funky Bunch and Tim Burton film, a lot of us, including myself admittedly, were pretty damn skeptical. But what they ended up making was a terrific trilogy of films. I don't think any of them, other than maybe Dawn, are like truly highest of the high-level elite quality films, but it's just a great solid trilogy of movies. All of them are really good, and it deserves honorable mention. Honorable mention number 2, and I know a lot of you were going to put this in your top 5, but it's the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. Now, we had come off a very dark era of Batman films before Warner Brothers decided to take another swing at it and bring us Christopher Nolan's vision of Batman. And it came, of course, with Batman Begins, and everybody sat up and took notice. Then they followed that up with arguably the greatest comic book movie of all time. It's in my top 2 at least, and a lot of people it's their number 1 film with The Dark Knight. And then you got The Dark Knight Rises, which I think was a pretty steep fall off in quality, but still a good film, good enough that it deserves to be mentioned in honorable mention. I think if The Dark Knight Rises was like 15-20% better than it was, I think then you got to take this Dark Knight trilogy and put it in the top 5. But because it kind of finished a little bit weak, in my opinion at any rate, it's good enough to get an honorable mention, but not quite in the top 5. And the final honorable mention is another one I think a lot of you guys were going to put in your top 5. You might be surprised that I'm not, but it's the Captain America trilogy. You know, Captain America is a lot like the Christopher Nolan trilogy in the fact that it had 2 exceptionally strong films and 1 good film, except it was in reverse order. The Captain America good film was the first one, and then it just got better with Winter Soldier, and then it just got really better with Civil War. It's a terrific trilogy of films, but just not quite enough to get into the top 5. So once again, my honorable mentions here are the Planet of the Apes, the current ones, the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy, and the Captain America trilogy. All right, so let's get into the actual top 5. My number 5 best trilogy of all time is what happens when you get 2 of the era's greatest filmmakers with one of the era's greatest movie stars all together to do a franchise, and you get Indiana Jones. The first movie on its own, Raiders of the Lost Ark, is considered by a lot of people to maybe be the greatest adventure movie of all time. And then you get some people like me who think the series just got better and better as they went along. Now remember, we're only talking about the first 3 Indiana Jones films, that trilogy. We're not counting Crystal Skull. So after Raiders comes Temple of Doom, which actually chronologically takes place before the events of Raiders of the Lost Ark, but it just upped the ante to me. I mean, they threw in a lot of great creepiness and a lot of great adventure, and the whole Kalima with pulling out the heart of me. So many scenes that are memorable forever. And then to me, the piece de resistance, they finished off the trilogy with the best of the bunch with Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. And what better way to end that trilogy than the visual imagery they had with all those guys riding off in the sunset on horseback. It was a terrific ending to the trilogy. Probably should have stayed the end, Crystal Skull. But anyway, it's just fantastic. So Indiana Jones is my number 5. Number 4 on my list was an automatic of making it into the top 5, and that's the Godfather trilogy. Now, all 3 films were nominated for Best Picture, and 2 of them, Godfather 1 and Godfather 2, actually both won Best Picture at the Academy Awards. Talk to a lot of movie buffs, and they'll say that, yeah, it's no doubt that a Godfather movie is probably the best movie of all time. They'll just disagree about whether it's Godfather 1 or Godfather 2. And when you got two films in a trilogy where a lot of film historians and film buffs will argue about which one of them is not just the best of their trilogy, but the best movie of all time, you know the trilogy has to be in the top 5. Now, why isn't it a little bit higher if we were talking so big about those two? Well, the third one was a step down in quality. It was still nominated for Best Picture, and I like the film a lot more than most other people do, Godfather Part 3, but even I will acknowledge it was a step down. But the fact of the matter is, two of the Godfather films won Best Picture. Of course, it's got to be in the top 5. It takes the number 4 spot for me. Coming in the number 3 spot is actually, critically speaking, the best trilogy of the bunch, and that's the Toy Story trilogy. I know it's weird to think of it that way, an animated series of films, but look at it this way. Do you know how many big wide release films in the last 30 years have 100% on Rotten Tomatoes? I think it's 2 of them. Toy Story and Toy Story 2. And then that terrible Toy Story 3, it got a miserable 99% on Rotten Tomatoes. Yeah, that's right. The Toy Story franchise, critically speaking, has 100% for number 1, 100% for number 2, and 99 for number 3. That means out of 300 possible percent, Toy Story has 299. And although it's weird to think about Toy Story in terms of greatest trilogies of all time, when you really do stop to think about it, each one of those movies is a freaking masterpiece. Toy Story 1, Toy Story 2, and Toy Story 3, arguably each one got better and better as the series progressed. That's also rare when they just keep getting better and better and better as the franchise goes. Ending off on number 3, which I actually kind of think number 3 was the best one of the bunch and was nominated for Best Picture, rightly so. It should have been. It probably even should have won the award, maybe. There's an argument to be made for that. But Toy Story is an incredible achievement in storytelling, in character, in nostalgia, and all leveraging a very underappreciated medium in animation. No doubt whatsoever, and I'm very comfortable making Toy Story number 3 on the best trilogies of all time. Now we get to the number 2 best trilogy of all time, and you know how I mentioned how The Godfather, all 3 films were nominated for Best Picture, so obviously it's got to be on the list. Well, another trilogy also had all 3 of its films nominated for Best Picture, and that was the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Lord of the Rings 1 and 2, both nominated for Best Picture, and then Lord of the Rings 3, The Return of the King, came out and tied the all-time record for most Oscar wins by a movie. It won 11 Academy Awards. No film in history has ever won more Oscars than Lord of the Rings, Return of the King. Again, another entry in this list that just got better and better. Like, I really love Fellowship of the Ring, but then I thought Two Towers was just a little bit better, and then Return of the King, I think arguably one of the greatest movies of all time. And now we come to number 1, which might be the most anticlimactic number 1 of all time, because we all knew what was going to be number 1, and that's the original trilogy of Star Wars. Not the Abomination prequels, the original trilogy of Star Wars. You know, we talked a lot about films on this list with incredible critical ratings, a huge Oscar success, incredibly memorable, some of the greatest filmmakers together of all time. But when you're talking about Star Wars, you're not just talking influential as far as influential on how movies were made and influential on filmmakers. No set of movies ever in history have had a bigger impact on our culture as Star Wars has. Every comedy on TV references Star Wars. Every drama on TV references Star Wars. Almost every movie references Star Wars. Star Wars is everywhere. It's omnipresent. It's everywhere you turn, everywhere you look. Star Wars is there. The footprint that this franchise of films has on our culture will never be equaled and will never go away, no matter how good or bad future Star Wars plans will be. So again, number 5, Indiana Jones trilogy. Number 4, The Godfather trilogy. Number 3, the Toy Story trilogy. Number 2, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And number 1, the Star Wars trilogy. But as I said at the beginning, this list, like movies in and of themselves, is just subjective. That's my list, and I feel pretty good about it. But the big question here is, what are your top 5 trilogies of all time? What are some films you would give some honorable mentions to as well? How does your list look compared to mine? Does it look a lot different? Does it look a lot the same, just in different orders? What do you think? Jump into the comments section below and let me know your thoughts. And listen, if you're one of the people who enjoys the 70 to 90 videos I produce every month and you want to become one of my Patreon supporters, that's awesome. There's a link to my Patreon page below. And while you're here, make sure you click the subscribe button, become a subscriber to my YouTube channel. That'll do it for me, guys. So until the next video, my name's John Campea. Bye-bye.